So I believe they already have a tenant lined up for it.
I would think so, but I noticed they were actively doing the front end as well. I was surprised.
All right, so everybody had a chance to look at that invoice? Anyone have any further questions? I'll give Tim a chance to take a look, too.
I do not have any additional questions.
All right,
Scott, I'm gonna steal a pen. Go for it.
so if not, I guess I'll look for a motion to approve this.
So moved.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Aye, opposed? All right. And we have minutes for December 3rd. Has everyone had a chance to take a look at these as well?
Yeah, right there.
Does anyone have any changes, additions, corrections? No, hearing none, then, oh. No, all
Just a
right.
minor edit on first page, under the minutes section, third row, second, my Bicken.
Mister.
I mean,
You are my
Other than that, all good.
All right, without any further, I'll look for a motion to approve these.
Motion to approve.
Second?
Motion and a second. Any further discussion on these? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I'll abstain.
Abstain. Okay. All right, moving on. We have the public hearing, SB 486. And I guess we're kind of combining it with, well, keeping it separate, but the same thing as SB 491, 60 West Main Street in Cumberland Farms.
The laptop's right there.
Oh, wonderful.
You can do it, or I can if you want.
Yeah, we can probably,
It's kind of weird, some of the pictures are smaller, so you have to zoom in, and
Okay.
some of them are really big, so you gotta zoom out.
and everything can be done on the laptop, or is there?
You can do it right
We
here.
do it on the laptop?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have a remote
That's fine.
for it.
I'm not giving this part of the presentation anyways.
Well, I'll leave it here. so
Perfect.
if you want me to do it? Fine.
Okay, we can handle that.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for seeing us again. For the record, Tom Reedy, attorney with Bacon Wilson out of Amherst, here on behalf of Cumberland Farms in those two special permits and site plan review still. So with me this evening, I think we brought the whole crew. We've got Don Johnson from Cumberland Farms. We've got John Marchand, who's our civil engineer, who you've heard from before. Maureen Schlebeck, our traffic engineer, who you've heard from before. Bob Coluccio, who is our pump and tank plan engineer, who you've also heard from before. And we've also got Tracy Roll, who's a developer. So last time we were here 2 weeks ago, we had not received the traffic peer review back. We had not received the stormwater peer review back. For this meeting, we have both of those, so I think one of the things that we can do is probably have Maureen get up, just talk about that letter briefly, and then see if there are any additional questions, and then we can throw it over to John to talk about stormwater, and if there are any questions, and then your choice, whether we talk about the pump and tank plans at that time, or if you want to talk about the site design. We have redesigned the site in consideration of all the comments that we've heard to date. You'll see that the building has been brought up. We've actually tried to rotate it a bit so that it works for Cumberland Farms and hopefully also works for the town. So we can either talk about that or we can talk about those pump and tank plans. So I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if that's an okay order, if we start with traffic and then
Yeah, absolutely.
take off those peer reviews and then move forward. Okay. Maureen?
Good evening, Maureen Schlebeck with McMahon Associates. So as you know, we got a peer review letter in on December 10th And I'll just touch on a couple of the points in the letter. Essentially, Vanessa and Associates had agreed with the methodology of our traffic study and subsequent studies when we expanded the study area and the things that I testified at the last hearing. In terms of our evaluation of West Main Street and the Route 140 intersection assessment, they agreed with our determination of the impact of the site. They did have one suggestion to look at signal timing 6 months after occupancy, which we would agree to do if the project got approved. They were concurrent with our sightline assessment and the vehicle queue observations, and also our recommendation and determination regarding a crosswalk to the senior center. So all of that, they seem to be in agreement with our analysis. There was one topic that was raised at the last hearing that I wanted to go back to, and that was the question of how we picked the land use code on the trip generation. So we had used the convenience market with gas pumps, and there is another land use code that's gasoline/service station. So when you look in the trip generation manual published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers, they describe the different land uses. And that particular land use, if you prioritize the gasoline station, that's supposed to be the primary business of the site. And typically, those sites also repair motor vehicles and have car washes. So in our view, the convenience market was more the primary use of the site, and so we used the other land use code. So that's pretty much all I have for you tonight, unless you have questions.
Which, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Which code is that? Is that 853?
853 is the one that we used.
I was just trying to get some information on that. Is this basically the code that you were using? I don't have the actual manual, but what I've gotten was that information. And from what I could tell, it's not just limited to the square footage of the store, it's also the number of pumps.
That's right. And the manual actually gives you, they state what's the more reliable source to use, and the trip generation manual does cite the square footage of the convenience market as being the more reliable source to use on that land use code.
So that 853.
Yeah.
But at one point you were saying it's just tied to the square footage, but it's really the square footage of the store is one component, and also the number of pumps is another component to calculating the square footage.
Yeah.
It's the number of
Right.
trips.
Right, and in that manual, they recommend using square footage over the number of pumps. That information is more reliable. It's based on more studies and better data.
And one of the things I was trying to get to is trying to get an understanding of how those compare with actual usage. And I was just taking a look at the Mansfield project, the Mansfield property that you have, and that's basically, this is 384,000 square feet, and that one's 3,600 square feet, I believe, with 8 pumps. Are you familiar with that project at all?
I don't believe, I'm not sure if McMahon did that one. In Mansfield?
That's the,
Mansfield.
Oh, Mansfield.
Mansfield Avenue.
Oh, the one up, yeah, I know which one you're talking about. I'm sorry.
That's why I'm bringing the one in Mansfield,
In-
which is next to Fresh Catch and Juan's Market, and that's been in operation since 1982.
okay. And what I'd appreciate, I don't have to do it now, but if you could just provide us with the detail of how you calculate that, because I was running some calculations and I just got different numbers than you had.
Well, it's been peer-reviewed by professional traffic engineers, and they concurred with our calculations.
All right. Well, in the numbers I was looking at, there was a difference. Obviously, the Mansfield Avenue property would be significantly less than what yours was, given the difference in square footage and the number of pumps. Would it surprise you to learn that someone taking a rough count yesterday of the general traffic there of 1,000 cars back and forth, that there were a total of 104 units going in and 104 units going out within an hour from 7 to 8, which is basically more than you're projecting for the site in West Main Street?
Yeah, I can't testify to
Well,
the-
what I was
to
trying to get at
something
was,
we didn't
Do you have any
do.
records as to what your actual use is? Because from just a layman's look at that kind of number, it was apparent to me that the numbers of the actual use in that particular area, in this area, was in excess of what these calculated numbers are. And it's important for me in terms of the sensitivity of this particular area.
Right. So let me just explain a little bit about how the trip generation manual is comprised. I mean, the Institute of Transportation Engineers collects data from numerous sources across the nation. So it's not a comparison of just this site to the one site that you're speaking of. It's a whole bunch of sites brought together and a lot of data that gives us the information to get our averages. I mean, we could find an example of a low generating convenience store and gas station and put that in the report, but that's not the way we do it. We take the best data that we have, which is what's published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. It's based on a lot of data points, and we take the average from that.
Does Cumberland Farm have any data on how many actual people come into their store during a particular hour? Don't they have any kind of data that would reflect how many coffees they serve within an hour? I mean, they must have some sense of it. I'm trying to get a real sense as opposed to, I understand, the data is the data, but certainly if you put this store where it is now, or you put it up 3 miles west, there you're going to get a different traffic count, you're going to get a different turning radius. You know that and I know that.
So it's not an exact science. We can't predict exactly how many trips are coming in and
I'm trying to
out.
get something closer.
We are applying the best
So I'm
practices in the industry.
I'm gonna stop this here. I mean, this is kind of gone on a little long. You know, she presented the data several times. We've had a peer review look it over. If there are questions of the peer reviewer, we can ask them as well, but, I mean, I think we're talking apples and oranges with the Mansfield Ave store, I mean, personally. I don't have a horse in this race, but I mean, those are two completely different locations, and the explanation of how the data was brought is satisfactory to me.
Well,
I mean, at some point, we do have to move on from this, and if there are questions, that's absolutely fine.
I'm happy you're satisfied. I'm not. So
And which is-
I understand we have to move on.
Which is absolutely your prerogative, but at the risk of, you know, continuing to dwell on the same exact topic for far too long, we need to move on from that. If you have specific questions, we can absolutely bring them to her and get responses, but, I mean, other than that, I think we need to move on.
Thank you for your time.
Okay.
So I guess we're with, you want to do the
Stormwater?
stormwater, yeah.
This might be the best.
We just have the one camera.
For that,
No, there is another camera.
is it better to move that?
Good evening, John Marchand from Farland Corp. Since our previous meeting, we've received the peer review comments for our stormwater report. I think a lot of the comments, it's a fairly extensive narrative. I think a lot of the comments have been satisfied. I think there's two outstanding comments that need to be addressed. One of the comments is in regards to the groundwater mounding under our proposed stormwater infiltration systems. We have differing, I guess, methods of determining our mounds, so what we're proposing to do is to do an in-situ test of the soil in the field to kind of eliminate any assumptions that we're making. And then the other outstanding comment is in regards to the TSS removal efficiency that we're providing our water quality calculations with. We're proposing 2 CDS water quality units that are proprietary systems. They typically credit 80% TSS removal. The manufacturer calculations for this site come out to 92% TSS removal. We're requesting 44% just to meet our pre-treatment requirements. And I think the peer review engineer has suggested 30%. We feel comfortable with our 44% treatment. We feel that's fairly conservative. I think the remaining comments are either have been satisfied or are just, you know, fixing some calculations, but
I guess, have you had additional correspondence with the peer reviewer outside of what's on?
no.
No, okay. Perfect, okay. The peer reviewer is here, I
Yeah.
guess, so I think, yeah, I guess in regard to both those open issues that you mentioned, my comment would be that not being an engineer, we're relying on the peer engineer's work. So some of this seems to be kind of a little bit of inside baseball to me.
Mhm.
So,
Understood.
I think it would be helpful to, especially with the TSS removal,
Mhm.
or in, the methodology around the mounding. I'm not gonna be able to read a manufacturer's spec on a CDS unit.
Right,
And be satisfied with, that it's going to do anything other than sit there, because I don't know how it works.
Okay. Yeah, I think that
So,
we could
I think that's.
kind of
yeah.
work it out between,
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. That would be my general comment about both, I think both of those issues.
All right, so I guess we're going to have the peer reviewer come up. Who do we have? John Chessie. All right. Yeah, John, you can come on up.
I think those are basically the major two issues, as I see it. There's a few things that you could condition, and if you want me to sort of zip through these regs and what they mean and what, quickly, there's basically 10 standards to meet, and the first one relates to stormwater has to have some level of treatment. Everything's treated on the site in some manner, so they meet that one easily. Discharge rates, they can't have more water go off the site after they develop than goes off today, in terms of how fast it goes off, the rate of runoff off the site, and you can't create a flooding problem to a neighbor or an abutting property or the road. The design, picture of the design. So what they've done to change some things, so this is a infiltration basin here, so water runs in. The entire 100-year storm is contained with this, wouldn't overflow. This is a subsurface system that primarily catches the canopy and the building roofs, but it does also catch water from this trench drain here. That's an infiltration system as well, which basically catches all the water. There's a small bio-retention area here that basically collects this sidewalk. Because it's impervious area, you have to treat every bit of impervious area, so there's a little bio-retention area here that goes off into the back. So that's how they control the rates of runoff, and I believe they would meet that subject to the questions I had on the mounding, which if they're gonna run an in situ test to get a rate for the soils, that would make sense, and we can kind of go from there and see what we get in terms of that mound. So I have no problem with that. I think that'll answer that question. Next one is the recharge rate. You have to mimic how much water currently soaks into the ground, so you don't change the groundwater conditions. And they're recharging far, far in excess of what you would need to, because everything's going into infiltration systems. The next one is total suspended solid. So that's about the treatment of the water and keeping it, pavement, when you go and see the first flush of rain off pavement, the water's dirty. Over time, it might clean up. You want to catch that dirty water in the first inch of rain, typically, is how that's assessed. So for treatment, they have, in this this doesn't show it all, but I kind of know where stuff is. There's a couple catch basins here that go to this CDS unit that goes into this. Catch basins get credit for treatment only if they pick up a quarter of an acre of impervious or less. These pick up in excess of that, so they don't get any credit for these. So the only credit for pre-treatment is this one unit. And, you know, you run the manufacturer's calculations, and I know manufacturers that are selling a product sometimes may be a little bit optimistic on what they do, and testing shows that they probably don't get what they say. Essentially, it's a pre-treatment device that swirls, the water comes in and swirls, which sort of forces the particles that are heavier to settle out by spinning. And then it goes right into this, which soaks into the ground. And essentially, anything that, you know, the gas station portion and the tanks pitch this way to these two catch basins. So it's somewhat of a sensitive place for treatment. So these don't get credit for it. They just have this. There's no forebay. There's nothing to stop anything other than just this and a little bit of sumps in these catch basins. They have a little bit of a surface on top to catch floatables. But because it's such a large tributary area to them, water would flush through quickly, so that we tend to stir it up and let that pass through. So I think that's something that needs to be discussed on that issue. The next one is sort of related, and excuse me, that's a land use with a higher potential pollutant load, which a gas station is. So when you have a gas station, you have to have things that are valved, so if there's a spill, you can shut it off. And in my, excuse me, in my opinion, I think you need enough storage. What DEP requires typically is what's called an oil grid separator, which is a big tank, which has compartments in it that collect sediment and the floatables in the gas. And you valve that, so if there's a spill, you have storage for whatever. The typical spill on something like this, the worst case, would be if your tanker truck, like a hose blew or something went wrong there, you probably would size something according to that tanker truck one chain. That would be the biggest spill you would get, and then you want to shut it off so it doesn't get into the ground and soak in. So I advocate that you size something, a tank, more than these. These don't hold a lot of oils or gas that you can shut off to catch it. And I think that's what's required in these types of areas that have higher potential pollutant loads, especially where you have an infiltration system right downstream. This one here, all the area pitches here, with the exception of a little bit of this. So this wouldn't necessarily catch the same level of gas because the fueling area is covered with a canopy, first of all, so you don't get a lot of rain on it other than what flows in underneath. So it's not getting direct rainfall washing it off. And I believe the tanks are over here, so if there was a spill, it would tend to be on this side and go to this system, not as much on that direction. That's just the same as any other access driveway to other, you know. If they didn't have gas pumps and it was just a convenience store, it would be the same type of thing. The other standards, protection of a critical area. This isn't necessarily in a DEP designated critical area. I understand that it's in your zone 3, but it's not in a DEP critical area. It is a redevelopment or partial. There was a building on it, there is some pavement, but it's treated as new construction. And I think they, subject to the comments they have, they would comply with, you know, most of the redevelopment things. A condition, and I recommend you include, they need to do a stormwater pollution prevention plan under EPA requirements, and I recommend that, you know, it's a fairly densely developed site, so the construction traffic will be a lot of trucks, and you don't want to have tracking into the roadway, you don't want to have any sediment flow off into the abutting property, so they develop a plan for that. But that's usually done after everything's sort of approved, and then you review it, but don't let them start until you've reviewed it and accepted that plan. The last one, well, second last one, operation and maintenance plan, they did that, and I think they, you know, almost everything was there. There were a couple of conditions I had in my letter. One of them was pretty hard to clean, these underground things, so typically you would put maybe a manhole, some sort of access to get something to flush them out. You don't want to have to rip it up. The roof's pretty clean, but this thing here could get sediment in that line, so you usually have a way to access the end And then sometimes what they do is they'll jet them, and they'll isolate where the dirt gets in, and it would tend to be from really this trap going to there. I know that they have a treatment unit here, but it only collects so much of it. Finer materials get through. And the bioretention area here needs more detail. I think that's a minor thing. I don't think they have any problem with doing any of that. So, the last thing is they have to provide an illicit discharge statement, and it shows that there's nothing like, something in here, some wash sink connects to that. You can't have that type of thing. They have sewer connection, I believe, so everything would go connected there. Sewer goes there, stormwater goes there. You just have to demonstrate that there's no cross connections, and they sign that statement. So, that is my report, unless you have any questions.
Just two things. In terms of the CDS unit, is there, I guess maybe this is a question for both, is there a way to see what one of those has done on a different site? Would that satisfy, because they're claiming 80, you're saying 30, well, the manufacturer says 80 there, you say 30, and they're saying 44?
So 44 is what is required for pre-treatment by DEP for this type of a system, in this type of a location. So they picked 44 because it meets the pre-treatment necessary for the capital, right?
Okay.
So manufacturers' data is their data. There's reports, DEP published a report that assessed these. There's been lots of different studies. Essentially, it's what's called an online swirl chamber, and some reports give that in the range of 30%. Some specific studies, but they're only for one specific model. It isn't necessarily that model. They'll give different results. And the manufacturers tend to want to sell their products, so they always say it's a higher thing. It's only a pre-treatment device. It isn't going to, I don't think it's likely that it's going to remove 90% of the total suspended solids in a storm, because the fine sediments just can, if you looked at a puddle of an area that's got fine soils, it stays cloudy for days. You think it's going to get caught and think it's not. It's going to go through. So it only catches the bigger stuff like the sands and the larger particles. So that's why I say that. I say that it's not new for this town or this project. I say it for every town I work in, every project that does these. I say this is what you should give them for a rate. If you're going to always give them a rate, and I, have some means of why I say it. I think that it's a discretionary allowance that the board can choose to give it or not to give it. So it's really up to you. It is your discretion. And I advocate, especially in a case like this, to have more than that. They could add more catch basins, get 25 for these, and then they'd need it. They could add another unit that would give them a better thing. The other thing about these is, there are catch basins here that, although they're not sized appropriately, they will catch the biggest of the particles, even though they're catching too much area. The studies are basically for that as a single inline unit without the other. They just take a study that they put the particles in. They don't have a multiple frame typically.
So it's already gonna,
the manufacturer does, so.
So the low-hanging fruit will already be gone by the time it gets
Some
to
of the
that.
stuff would already be gone before it gets to it. Even though these don't get any credit, they might still remove 10% of the water that they're getting or something, but they don't have that. They're advocating in DEP to have more catch basins. So that's another thing. They could add some catch basins to meet that as well, which would give you extra capacity to store more gas where it's filled.
Yeah. The other question is, on page 5 of your letter, in the middle, you mentioned that there was overflow near the bioretention area.
Yeah. So
that's a word that I don't generally want to see in
overflow
stormwater.
okay, so water comes in and water goes up. Typically, if this were, most infiltration basins are not sized to take a whole 100-year storm. There would be a pipe going out somewhere. In this case, because there really isn't much of anywhere to go. But what they're doing is there was, the site sort of sloped this way for a good piece of it. almost all of that's now captured, with the exception of a little bit in this corner and a little bit in the back. So the area tributary off-site is considerably reduced. So the flows off-site would be considerably reduced. If you didn't have this at all, the flows off-site would still be reduced. This is strictly to treat this sidewalk. So water comes in, it's only, fire retention basins, for treatment, they only have to treat an inch of rain. So in a 100-year storm, 7 inches of rain, water's gonna come in, water's gonna go out, just like it would have if it wasn't there, and just like it does today. So it doesn't increase flow off-site.
Okay.
It just, flow comes in, flow goes out. Small storms probably don't even get out, but bigger storms are gonna get out because you're not gonna make the thing that big.
All right, and that's just at that corner.
That's just right here.
Okay. I think when your report mentioned northern, I forgot which way the site was oriented.
Yeah, north
So I
is
was
down.
thinking it was the
Yeah.
giant
North is
one to
down,
the
not up.
right.
Yep.
But yeah, okay. That makes sense. And is there a catch basin on the street near there? I think.
The catch basin's down here, but the water actually goes that way,
Okay, so it would go,
south,
so the abutters there would see similar runoff that they see now.
probably less.
Okay,
Actually, I'm sure it's less.
okay.
Could you explain the mounding calculation issue?
Okay, so there's a couple of different elements in it. So the way the mounding calculations are done, you take this, let's take this system because it's just a rectangular shape. So you take this footprint and the 100-year volume recharged over this footprint is applied, and there's a formula that USGS has published a spreadsheet. They use a different program, I believe. It's GeoHydroCycle, Steve Smith's program. They're basically the same formulas that are used. So you apply this load over this area, and then the soil underneath has the capability to take it away, and it'll drain over a certain amount of time. But when you apply a bunch of water in sand, if you took a slice and you put a piece of glass in front of it, you would see the water. Say you had a water table here, you'd see the water come down through, and the water table underneath would sort of make a little mound like that. Right? So the calculations sort of formulate that mound. If the mound comes up too high, it's a problem, because then it wouldn't work. It's allowed to come into the bottom of the system as long as it drains away within a certain amount of time, as long as it's not so high that it would influence the ability for this to flow in or things of that nature. So what was done is there's two things. One is, and this is just technical things, is a form term specific yield. It's how much sort of the water in the pores of the sand is the specific yield. That's a simplification of what it means. And the other is the hydraulic conductivity. So that means you put the water in the sand and how fast it goes through it. Okay. So if you had real coarse sand, water goes through it pretty fast. If it's finer, it's slower. And they used, for specific yield, I forget what they used, but USGS says you should use 0.15, and I have an email from the guy that did one of the formulas. I can send that to you if you'd like, to show why that number is used, okay? I didn't just make it up. And the other thing is they use basically like, okay, this is this type of soil, so here's a published thing that hydraulic conductivity of this type of soil might be in this range. But it's a specific site with specific conditions, may be different. And so they're gonna test it to find out what it is, and then
We'll
use
see
that
it in-
number, and that's.
We'll see it in
that's
round
reasonable.
2, basically.
Yeah, and that's a reasonable solution.
Okay, so they will address that.
Yes.
Now, I know Tim mentioned it, but could you just describe what this TSS is? And it goes from 80 to 90 to 60 to 40? and-
TSS is considered, it's kind of it's total suspended solid. So in the water in runoff, the rain comes, hits the parking lot. Over the dry period, you get dust, you get dirt, you get whatever that's landed on the parking lot for various reasons, either cracked, deposited by whatever. When the rain comes, typically the first inch of rain flushes it out of the pavement, and it runs down. So if you took a glass of that water, you'd see all the particles suspended in it. That's the suspended solids. So the intent is to remove as much of them as you can. Under the state, you're supposed to remove 80%. Norton, I think, requires 90 in certain areas in the bylaw. So you put devices in to catch them. So if you put a catch basin, and you've seen around town, they come in, they clean up the catch basin, they get all the dirt that's been collected from sanding the roads in the winter, gets in the catch basin, they have to dig it up. And that catches other materials too. So that catches a certain percentage, just not a high percentage. Then these swirl chambers, they catch a greater percentage because they're a little more effective than a catch basin. In an infiltration basin or an infiltration system like that, they catch a lot because it's basically filtered through the soil. So the sediments are trapped in the soils. Something of this size, for a project of this size, is going to take a long time to really clog the bottom, but in 10 or 15 years, they may have to come out, dig the bottom out, get rid of the sediments, and reestablish the basin.
Of the retention pond?
Yeah.
Okay, so where does this 90% filtering come in? Is there something that's,
It's all sort of based on theoretical data. DEP has said that you put this in, we'll give you this much DSS credit. You put, so catch basin, you get 25% if it's sized appropriately. If you put in what's called an oil grit separator, you'd get 25%. You put in a detention basin that handles a certain volume of water, you get 80% provided you met the pre-treatment requirements to get the heavy particles out. A bioretention basin properly designed and built, the way they are made, is essentially a depth of compost mixed soil.
but that's just for that little corner?
That's just for this corner, but I'm just explaining the TSS portion. So that, DEP says you get 90% removal through a bioretention area. So, as an engineer, what you try to do is you say, okay, I gotta meet this. I'll put in one of these, and one of these, and that'll get me where I need to go. So that's how it is. Now, relative to manufacturers, they're always trying to sell it, so every one of them is gonna say that they remove all this stuff, and they give you a calculation thing that you do. And
So-
I get it, but I don't necessarily agree with the manufacturers as much as I agree with other independent studies done by USGS or whatever.
So with the 44%, they would reach the 90% TSS in this location?
If you, off the top of my head, I haven't done that math, but I believe the way that the formula works. You don't have one of those sheets where it just shows how that's done? No, it's okay. So there's a formula, so basically, let's say, so you have 44%, so you start with 100% TSS. This removes 44%. So then you take the remainder, which is 66%, and this removes 80% of the remaining 66%. And you have to do the math out to get what the final total is, but I believe probably you would get to 90 if you had a 44 here and you moved 80% of the 66, then that's the final load. It's sort of a spreadsheet formula you do to figure it out,
Okay.
which is a little bit more complicated than I
So
can
they're
say.
proposing a manufacturer that they think is the equivalent of 44, but the spec is only 32? Is that what we're talking about?
What I'm saying, so their manufacturer says that my product will remove 90% based on whatever calculations that they do, that they prepare, and you just enter the numbers, and it gives you, this will do this. Just so you know, to make it even more complicated, it depends a lot on what the particle sizes are that are used in that analysis. It depends on a whole bunch of other factors. If you had sizes where all the particles were like 1/4 of an inch, it would remove it all, right? If it was particles that were the size of clay, it's going to have a hard time removing much of any of it. So there's a whole much more detailed thing. DEP has simplified it to make it easy for someone to just say, I use this, I get this, I use this, I get this. When it comes to a proprietary thing, like they're proposing here, it is the discretion of the approving authority based on, what the evidence presented as to what you accept as the removal rate. So they're presenting stuff that says, we think it removes 90% or 92% or whatever. I don't think that's realistic, personally. So I think typical swirl chamber of that usually gets 30. These things are not the worst ones. Some of the worst, these are pretty decent as far as removing stuff, but I still think that's optimistic, so. But it's not.
And that's not including the areas above those, right? Is what you had said. Above that
They're
swirl
only
chamber,
taking
yeah.
credit for removal in the CDS unit and the infiltration basin.
Okay.
And the same for this one. The trench drain doesn't have the stump, it doesn't get anything. CDS unit and the subsurface system.
Now, the area that's in there in light yellow, what is that?
That's the canopy over the gas tank?
No, those are the yellow. The surrounding area, the big squares around, that covers part of the gas tank? The pale white, is it white?
This?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, that's concrete.
Is now, that sloping all, is
That
that,
all pitches to these areas, it slopes. This doesn't have the proposed contours on it, I don't think. But, do you have one?
The contours.
okay, so but that's draining toward the pump?
This all
toward
drains
the
in this
retention pond.
direction.
Okay.
So the only part that drains, there's a portion that drains to this when you come in. This pitches back to this catch basin, and most of this side goes to the catch basin. I think there's a ridge sort of in the middle. But this is concrete, and this is asphalt.
And, like, so we're talking, okay, so if there's gasoline that's leaked on that pavement, and there's a big heavy rainstorm, this TSS doesn't pull out the gasoline elements, the benzene? Is
No,
that-
the way they're to be trapped in, so in the catch basin, there's a hood inside, so you probably have about that much storage before it gets in, you know. Of course, it might get stirred up and go through the hood, but there's a little bit of room for floatables on top of the catch basin. And I don't know exactly what the storage capacity of these units is. They list it. If you read DEP for land use high potential pollutant load, they say at a minimum for a gas station, they should have an oil grit separator. I think an oil grit separator has more gasoline storage than these units. And one of my questions was, what do they provide for storage? Is it equivalent? And if it's not equivalent, then you probably should provide something that is equivalent.
So all of that drains down to the catch basins and to these separators? Or does it go directly to the base catch basin? And it'll go to the catch basin?
So then it goes into this. So it goes from the catch basin to a manhole to the swirl chamber to the infiltration.
And the oil grid separator does what for gasoline? Does it take?
The way that is, it's like a multi-chambered tank, so that water comes in, the first chamber collects sort of sediment, the next chamber collects the oil in a, because the way it's set up, it's got a T in it, so water has to go down and come up through, sort of like a septic tank type of system, but the T is much deeper in the water, so the oil is floating, so you have, and the gas is floating, so that would give you that storage above, so if there's a, even if there's not a spill, if there's just a little bit dripping in, it still collects a volume of it.
And then they would specify in an O&M the rate at which they pump the
They
oil and
should
gas?
pump, yeah, they should be pumped, you know, or I think they have to be checked more frequently, and then if there's something in it, then you gotta pump it up.
Okay.
And these would be, yeah, all of that would probably be pumped out, not like, you wouldn't just use like a clamshell thing. You'd have to pump it out to get rid of the oil.
Any further questions?
So is your recommendation for them to add a CDS unit to accommodate the difference between the 44 and the 30%?
I think they need to add something, and I think they need to determine how much floatable they can contain and have at least the equivalent of an oil grid separator for floatable. I'm not, I mean, there's a bunch of different things they can do here to make it.
I'm seeing nodding from the other engineer, so I think.
Yeah, we're prepared to work with the 30% removal efficiency and make it, achieve the 44% required.
All right, yeah, I think the oil grid separator is something I'd want to see. I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody, but.
And just to kind of summarize what he was asking, the system they have in place right now will remove all oil and gas from the retention pond?
Well, it's intended capture any oil and gas before it gets into here through the various systems. That's the intention. And I think that's what needs to be kind of beefed up as to how much you catch in versus what an oil grid separator would catch. And is there, if you're going to replace that with something proprietary, is that meeting the performance standards you have to meet? I think that's the question.
Okay.
And it sounds like that question will be answered. It's just, right now, we don't have.
So with something like that, there'll be no oil or gas that would run into the retention pond?
I'm not going to guarantee that, because who knows what can happen, but you do what you can, the best you can to prevent it from happening by putting in the tools that are there. If somebody never pumps the thing out, and if something happens and there's a spill, and nobody knows what to do, and they don't deal with it, yeah, stuff will get in there. I mean, just like any, tanker turned over, I think, today in New Hampshire. Had 11,000 gallons in it. I mean, nobody planned on putting something on the side of the road to catch it. It happens.
That
So,
took place in New Hampshire, between exits 5 and 7.
anything can happen, but you want to put the tools in place to be able to catch the more common types of things that you expect to happen.
I think I'm looking forward to round 2 as the
Yeah.
revision happens.
Absolutely. All right, any further questions? All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Good, great. Thanks a lot. So probably the next thing to talk about is the site, some of the site changes. I think you see them in front of you, John. I don't know if you want to take them through, and I'll bring some.
I have a question about that retention. Can I ask what you want down here?
Yeah, I was gonna have questions at the end, but if you can come on up.
I just had a quick question.
Sure. Just while it's fresh in everybody's mind,
Yeah, thank you.
just make sure you state your name and address.
Sue Lieber, 16 Seminary Way. Just a quick question. I know you were talking about the runoff. It was very hard to see. Is it running off this way towards the retention pond?
It's all sloped towards
Sloped
the
towards that?
storm, the
Yeah,
catch
do you
basins
mind showing her
and-
just up front here,
I
just?
honestly couldn't really see from back there. I just want to make sure.
So the majority of, probably from here, all comes down to catch basins here, here and here, which
Then
discharge
feed
to the
into
basin.
that.
There's a small area here that discharges to trench gate, driveway here that goes to this underground infiltration system. And then there's a small bioretention area, which Mr. Chesia described, that kind of just catches the patio sidewalk area.
What he had mentioned with the oil grid separator would be in there before it goes into the pond.
The
Yes,
pond.
before
And
that.
then the pond just gets soaked into the ground, correct?
Correct.
And then you guys are testing for the water table.
Got it.
All right, perfect.
Good job.
Thank you very much. I just want to make sure I was there. Thank you.
All right, but before we move on, are there any further questions in the audience? Okay, go ahead.
So just a brief description of what's changed on this plan. Previously, the building had been kind of perpendicular to West Main Street. We've kind of kicked it so it's parallel with the side lot line. We've moved it forward. I think we're at the minimum front setback now. We've added this patio area in the front where there'll be some seating. There's a kind of like a knee wall in front. You can kind of see on the architectural rendering. There's a
Okay.
seating area with a pergola structure over the seating area, a brick knee wall to kind of separate that from West Main Street. The siding on the north and south side of the building are now proposed to be a brick veneer. That's essentially what's changed about the layout. Everything else kind of remains the same driveway pavement area. So there's a little bit additional sidewalk in front of the building
Yeah, because of the,
because of the
yeah.
angle.
Still just the one entrance towards the parking spaces.
Yeah, still that same one entrance, and I think if you're all familiar with the area, and as you're traveling on West Main Street, tucking it this way, you've got this building, plus we're proposing, I don't know.
Did you add additional trees on
Yeah,
that side too?
there's additional trees here, there's a fence, right here, a white vinyl fence, I think you can see it on this
Oh, yeah.
photo rendering right there. And as you're traveling, when you're traveling from this direction, you get kind of the front of the building. When you're traveling from this direction, you've got, this corner of the building, and the way that the road curves is you still get, you get that pergola in the seating plus that brick veneer, instead of, you'll recall that we started back here, moved it up, and then I think, this is a nice little compromise. We've added some landscaping right in here.
Are those actual windows on that side there, or are they going to be?
I think they're fake ones.
Okay. That's what I thought.
Yeah,
But it's definitely better than a flat wall.
We've also removed the green stripe. True. Yeah, there was a request last time to remove the green stripe. We've removed the green stripe.
You're going to have to forgive me because I'm dealing with two blocked ears, so I can see, but I can barely hear. I'm going to watch the meeting again. I think this is a marked improvement over what you had. You also moved the entrance closer to the street.
I think effectively, given the rotation of the building. And one of the things that, we thought about was how does it fit in with the neighborhood, and so what John did was look at the fronts of each of the buildings in the surrounding area, and you see that the lead edge of this Cumberland Farms would be 21 feet from the building, and you look at some of its neighbors, and you've got 43, 68, 88, across the street 45, 87, 65, 79, so you see that it is pulled up closer. I know that was one of the comments that we got is, can you bring it closer to the street? And so we tried to find that balance of fitting within the site, the lot lines, site circuit, everything that we've tried to do. And so we suggest we've struck that balance. And it's somewhat similar to what you saw, I don't know if you sent them that photo of the Florence store, but with that pergola over that patio. It's a nice walkable site. So we're happy to answer questions about that if you've got them.
Paul, we have all of these available if anybody wants to come by and see them.
Not yet.
I'm sure once Tom
That's
sends
right.
them.
So that's right.
We will have them.
Some of
We
this
will.
was, and obviously we understand the policy that you have. These are some things that we've done right up until today to say, how do we make this work for
Yeah, we
community?
knew 2 weeks in between was going to be tough to get some major changes, so I appreciate you bringing them in.
Yeah, no, of course, and then tomorrow, we can send you a call.
Just a question. I see the details on the, and I forget what you call them, on the side of the building, the roof line, the return,
Yeah,
that little detail there, that's going to be built, correct?
yes.
And then the only other concern I have for the site after what I think are important improvements are, did you change the height of the building?
I don't believe
Or
so.
maybe it's just visually, without the stripe, it doesn't look quite as, the first floor doesn't look quite as tall. If we could consider doing something in terms of substituting the vinyl white fence for a good quality wood fence. I think, I forget the exact dimensions of the lot, but you're going to use up Norton's entire allocation of vinyl fence. By way of example, in Plainville, they use a good quality wooden fence, and it blends in better rather than that white.
And so
You
you're
mean for
saying
the spot on the side?
Yeah, I mean,
Just here or the entirety?
well, I mean, frankly, a lot of the back is going to be, landscape, but I think for the two sides particularly,
Something here.
a good quality wood fence as opposed to the vinyl, I think blends in a little better than.
We'll take a look at that. I think it comes down to maintenance more than.
Yeah, I mean, the
vinyl.
one in Plainville, they've replaced it once in 20 years, so.
Okay. Vinyl might have a little bit longer lifespan, but we'll certainly talk about it.
Yeah, if it doesn't get cracked and bumped and.
Weed whack.
We'd like, yes. Anyone else have questions?
No.
Did you address the signage? The pylon sign?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're comfortable with the sign that we have, especially given the typical package that Cumberland Farms comes in with, given the roadway, the slight curve of the roadway, the elimination of the green stripe. You know, sometimes the green stripe can act as some sort of indicator of what the use is. You know, you've got a speedway not so far from here. That, I mean,
Where is your sign?
right here. So as you're traveling this way, you'll be able to see it, and also as you're traveling the other way, you'll be able to see it. 14.7 feet tall, 68 square feet. I mean, we just think for this site, the location where it is in relation to the roadway and the speed of travel on the roadway, we think it's appropriate, respectfully.
And that's in addition to the signage you show on the side above
Yeah.
the pergola and on the front entranceway, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
That's what I was gonna ask now. With the pergola on the street side, is there going to be plantings growing into that, or is it just the white surface?
I believe it's just the white surface.
Okay.
Will there be any vegetation growing on the pergola? No.
Okay,
White surface.
thank you.
What kind of material is the pergola being made out of?
Is it vinyl? Yeah, vinyl.
The,
And we can bring it up next time, or I'll send a photo to Paul. We'll send you a photo of what it looks like in real life at another site.
the brick wrap around the entryway, is that going to be carried into the canopy as well,
Yeah, I would imagine.
as opposed to the stone that you originally proposed?
So how we had stone, now we've got brick, so the canopy will have that feature, architectural feature as well. And this is pretty unique. I think there might be only one other site that has both ends with that brick.
So the back end, what's the back end? That's not brick. The back of it?
Say the-
The back, I guess what's the back of,
So this is,
okay, that's,
this
you're right.
right there, this is shown on this.
Are you asking what the siding material is?
Well, you said two sides had brick.
Yeah,
The
both
front
of the
doesn't.
ends.
The short sides.
The
Yeah.
short side.
The short- there.
No, that doesn't face anything other than your dumpster.
That's right, but there'll be patrons who are parking, and I think it's more symmetrical than just having one facade. Plus you've got a little landscape area over here as well.
I'm just curious, the parking was parallel before. Now, when you shifted the building a little bit, how did you accommodate the parking? I can see a big white rectangle, but where are the parking, like, spots in there?
Same as they were
Okay.
before, that hasn't changed. The building, I think, simply put, was from this and just slid up into that area.
Is that
This
just a
remains
paved or
same.
concrete
Yeah,
area?
There's
Okay.
concrete area, there's a bike rack proposed. So right up there, you've got a little landscaping island in there as well.
Yeah, it looks like moving the building just added extra concrete in the front.
That's right, yeah. And I can make a
Yeah.
photo
Spot for a bike rack.
Yeah.
of everybody's seeing.
Is that bend inside the counter?
Yes.
And I thought I heard, and I may not have, that the windows on that side are fake.
Correct.
I mean, it might be a good idea for at least that first window to be a real window, because you're going to have seating there. Frankly, you're going to have kids getting out of school. It might be a good idea for your own purposes to be able to kind of keep an eye on what's going on out there.
I mean, I think we'll probably have surveillance cameras out there. And I think as far as the floor plan goes, that's where we've got storage. And that's been the fundamental issue. We're trying to get that door over there, and so we're trying to do the next best thing.
Does the placement of that sign affect the site from that driveway?
No.
The sighting from the driveway?
No.
No, that driveway.
This driveway?
Yeah.
No. You'll see where it's set back. I don't know if you've got a scale, but we can tell you how far it's set back. But I think this sign has always been part of the sight line analysis that we've had for each of the site driveways.
Great, thank you. You may find that new orientation draws more people off the road
Yeah.
that are not getting gas.
Yeah.
you know, it may work in your favor as well, so.
I think like I said, I think it's a good compromise.
Hmm.
It took some work to get there, so thanks for the patience, but I think Cumberland did a good job in listening.
Yeah, I mean, it's night and day from what we saw 2 weeks ago, so give credit to whoever, well, all of you, busting your butts to get it done
You're
quickly.
looking at it right over there.
Yeah.
I mean, so we can talk about some other things here. Well, I guess what the next step for us would be, before we get into the underground storage tank and pump and take plans. I know John's got his list of a couple of things for stormwater that we can just provide to you so that you're comfortable with the stormwater design. We will finalize these plans, get them over to Paul along with a photo of what an existing site looks like with the pergola. And then, you know, understanding that we'll be continued to sometime in January. I think those things are a lighter lift because I think we've done most of the heavy lifting now.
There were a couple of the follow-up items that we had listed from the last meeting.
Sure.
I think one was, I think, the sale of alcohol, was Tim had mentioned.
Yeah, and I don't, so after talking to Cumberland Farms, and we can't agree to a condition to prohibit the sale of alcohol at this site. So currently, under the Commonwealth of Massachusetts laws, there's only so many that you can have. If those laws change, obviously, there's a process to go through. Retail is allowed by right in this village commercial zoning district, so if this was a use coming in, they would need site plan review. I doubt that you would look to impose a condition on that retail use that, and I don't know that you could under the site plan review standards, to prohibit alcohol sales. And as you know, there is a whole liquor license process through the Board of Selectmen, the Alcoholic Beverages Control Commission. So respectfully, we'll just have to decline agreeing to having that condition imposed. And then just, if the law does pass, go through the process that we would have to go through at that time.
The other question was, you are surrounded by residents on at least two sides. We'd ask about hours of operation.
Yes.
Limit those.
Yeah, so I think, and as we discussed last time, you know, one of the things, I guess, a couple of points. One, the Speedway down the street is open 24 hours. I think Cumberland Farms would look for their business model. One of the things is convenience and its predictability. If folks are wondering whether or not you're open, they're probably not even going to try to stop in. But if they know you're open 24 hours, they're more likely to stop in. It just gives them that sense of, are they 5 to midnight, are they 7 to 11, or are they 24 hours? Having 24 hours helps that.
You have other new stores that have limited hours. They don't, they go from 12 to 5. They're closed 12 to 5.
Potentially, but they could have potentially, I think the situation is different for those stores. They might have not applied for 24 hours. The town could prohibit, just in their zoning, 24-hour operation. But here, given the other site in Norton being 24 hours, the Speedway down the street being 24 hours, and I know that we had talked about limiting commercials, advertisements, music outside between the hours of, I think it was 9 p.m. and 6 a.m., that those noises wouldn't occur, you know, in consideration of the neighbors.
Would there be any other functional operation concerns, like the air compressor station, deliveries, things like that?
I think we would look to, I mean, we could limit deliveries if possible. Yeah, so we could limit deliveries, make sure no reverse gear alarms, so dump truck, dumpster truck coming, rubbish removal coming to pick it up, backing up if they're gonna back up to get it. So I think we could work that way. Does this site have an air condenser station? I'm sorry, I should. Yes.
It was originally over by the retention pond, I think, by the second or third space.
Yes, and I think, I don't see it on this plan, but I believe it is still there, so we moved it away, so it's not near any of the residences. You know, last time there was a question about what happens if there's a spill at 2 a.m., and when we talked to Cumberland Farms, it's the same operating procedure. They're always gonna have at least 2 people on site. And if that needs to be a condition, I mean, we've had that condition imposed in other 24-hour operations, so we're not concerned with that. But no, we don't see any other operational issues.
Are they video display fuel dispensers?
When you say video display.
Television on top of it, that's...
Not on top of it, I think in the middle of it, and it'll have advertisements run, typically, so we've been to Cumberland Farms, and so that's what we would turn off. We can't, under Massachusetts law, you have to have, I'll call it connectivity between the pump and the folks inside, just in case something is to happen, so we can't turn that off, but anything else, any other, you know, music, advertisements, et cetera, 9 o'clock comes. We found that that's worked in other residential area, when there's residences behind, we found that has worked.
On that issue, I've had personal experience with problems where the stores have said that the music and sound and volume are not controlled locally, that they couldn't turn it down, that it was controlled from wherever it came from. As part of my vote, I'm going to insist that there's a manual shut-off at the store, so that's, 9 o'clock comes, if for some reason there's been an override by the system, it can be shut off. I know the intercom has to stay on, no issue with that.
Sure, okay.
Anything further?
You were going to get back to the cost of decommissioning the tanks?
Yeah, and I guess, so I started to look into that a little bit more, and in talking with Cumberland Farms, a couple of thoughts came up. First of all, this is going to be about a 50-year lease. Second of all, talking about, I think it was Reed and Barton that you had mentioned, it seemed like a little bit of a different situation where they owned the property and they went into bankruptcy, so the town really had nobody to go after. Here, there is a separate landowner. I'm sure under the terms of the lease and under law, Cumberland has to remove the tanks. There is, as I'm sure you're aware, the mass contingency plan, and then MGL Chapter 21E. In case anything were to happen, there's the ability of whoever's a harmed party to get compensation not only for the cleanup, but also for any property damage associated with it. I think as we mentioned last time, we're still resolute not to provide any decommissioning.
What's the useful life of the tanks?
It's a great question. Useful life of the tanks? 30 years? 30 years.
And what do you typically do at the end of your term? Do you typically take them out?
Yes.
And what's the typical cost of taking them out?
$50,000? $60,000? That range?
That include a 21E, a type of survey?
You mean like a phase one? Yeah, that's part of it.
That's part of it?
Yes.
You do a 21E as part of it?
Absolutely. You're going to have the fire chief there or somebody from the fire department actually inspecting you, removing it, making sure that there's nothing that has leaked. I mean, again, as you'll hear in a minute, Bob's going to talk to you about all the bells and whistles associated with these. So if we're only finding out about it at that point, there's going to be some heads that roll.
It's a good segue into the tanks.
Right.
So there's an
Like I tried.
expectation then that you'll be replacing the tanks at 30 years in, even though you have a 50-year lease?
Yes.
Approximately?
Yeah. And I think what you've seen is, I think it was, and maybe Bob, I'm stealing some of your thunder, but was it in 2017 all single wall tanks had to be removed? And so that was just, I mean, they found that the useful life and the materials that it was and what they're finding in the ground as a result, they all had to be removed through a mandate. So yeah, it's not uncommon. I mean, when new technology, better technology comes out, more storage, and frankly, who knows what's going to happen with petroleum or other types of products when you've got some new fuels that may be coming out, so you may be looking at some different types of tanks going in the ground at that point. But yes, that's the expectation.
All new things we have to learn about.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
All right, before we start talking about the tanks, is there anyone in the audience with questions about the layout after that? Bless you.
Bless you.
All right, so I guess we can go start on the tanks now.
Yeah, either that, or do you want to do it? Whatever I'm happy to do it.
How do you?
Now that it's not midnight, we can learn about these.
Like that one's small, then the next one's big. Then it goes back to small, so.
You can do it there?
Yeah. What am I clicking on?
So on
So
the
this
pad,
is-
it's got a big bit.
Oh, okay, so it literally
You want to
scrolls?
go like this?
Okay,
Yeah.
I see, so it's just scrolling. This is the sort of thing you need to practice.
I'll take care of it.
Took me a minute to figure it out today.
If I had my own computer, maybe it'd be different.
Okay.
Yeah, you can just go to the cover page. Just, I know everybody's been staring at it, but my name is Bob Coluccio. I guess this is basically a review because I see all the same faces. Web engineering designs, it's install, we don't install them, but we oversee the construction, make sure that it's all, it goes in, okay, for underground storage tanks in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and I'm a professional engineer, and I'm registered in 6 New England states, including Virginia and Florida. So what you're looking up here is just our website to show that we are, that we're legitimate. And we have a specialty niche. We don't typically do the rubber stamp gas station design. We're called in when it really there's some real extenuating circumstances. Most of the time, we're pumping at 500 gallons a minute, and so I'm just telling you that because to give you some idea of what our credentials are. And if you just scroll through the next couple of plans, these are just this here set of plans is 6 30,000 gallon tanks, and I don't know if you'll know too many people that have designed a project like that. And these were all within the past couple of years with this 2017 thing. You can keep scrolling. The next one is 3 30,000 gallon tanks.
Were these put into service or just designed?
These are all into services, yep. And we're pumping up to 1,000 gallons a minute out of them. And so I have to look at all of the equipment associated with underground storage tanks and make sure that it's going to work, because when you're sucking out of them at 1,000 gallons a minute, you can't have leaks. Everything has to be tight. So I'm looking at it from an environmental containment standpoint, but it also has to function. And so that's what we do. And so you can this one is actually another 2 35s and a 30. So these have nothing to do with Cumberland Farms, but they have to do with web engineering and just our credentials that this is what we do. So what we have here, there we go. Oh, this thing doesn't work on that thing. It did the other day, didn't it?
Ricocheting, I think.
Yeah. Okay, anyway, there goes $50.
Just a question, at those capacities, what kind of pressure are you typically pumping?
The pumps on these they deadhead at 40 PSI. And the flow rates are variable depending upon how many dispensers are open at a time, but you're usually for gasoline getting maybe 8 gallons a minute out of each hose. What we're looking at here is just sort of like a cutaway of what a gas station looks like. And you can see from this, maybe this works from straight on, right? You can see that these tanks are ribbed for structural. I wanted to maybe correct one thing that Tom said, or add to it, and that is that when they say that the useful life of these tanks is 30 years, I've removed some fiberglass tanks that were close to that age, and useful life pertains more to what the manufacturer is willing to warranty it. And so somewhere maybe in the 1980s when they started making these tanks, they decided 30 years was far enough so that it wouldn't be anybody's problem who was building them. And so somehow 30 years got tagged on as being the useful life, but in reality, fiberglass, when you pull them out at 30 years, you wonder, where can I bring these? Because they look like they can be reused. And so that's a little bit of history on that. But you can see on this has all of the elements of what's in a gas station. You've got the double-walled tanks. Those tanks are filled with brine, so that if there's a leak in the tank, you're going to detect by an alarm right away. Where they fill them, you can see the spill buckets, these here. And I got cut sheets that's going to, I can use the mouse, can't I? Sure. So, these are the spill buckets. You can see that it has this secondary containment. These are the sumps where the pumps are. All this is all liquid tight, all tested, hydrostatically tested before it's put in service, and then hydrostatically tested routinely as, in accordance with Massachusetts regulations. We have double-walled piping that goes over to a sump that's underneath each of these dispensers, and then we got the dispensers. This whole thing is covered by a concrete mat, and as well as where the vehicles park. We're all familiar with that. So you want to scroll to the next one, and we can get into more. This is just another view. You can see that these tanks are not backfilled yet, but notice in the background you can see it's a well-washed, finely crushed stone or well-rounded stone. It's because it's very inert to the tanks, and so it's a very stable backfill for the tanks, so that that's why the tanks last so long. And when we're installing these things, as an engineer, we're watching to make sure no rocks roll down into the excavation, and so that's the key, is there's good quality control associated with these installations. But you can look and you can see these sumps there. They're glassed to the tanks, so that it's becoming a monolithic, if that's the right word, containment sump, a containment vessel for all of the equipment that's going in that sump. You can scroll it again.
Quick question back to that picture. The hoses, are they hoses or pipe?
Those are fiberglass pipes.
And are they double walled and brine
Yep,
filled as well?
They are. No, they're not brine filled, but they are connected to the sumps where there are sensors. So if you had a leak in the interior pipe, it would make its way to a sump where there's a sensor located. I'll have some more on that as we go. But
Can
that's
I ask one question based on that too, as we're talking? So this site is gonna have 2 of those tanks,
That's correct.
and those 2 are gonna service all of those pumps. So what's the longest, maybe this is something we can get back to, the longest pipe from that? I'm gonna assume that the pipes closest, the pumps closest to West Main are gonna be the furthest away from the tanks. How long is that pipe connection, and is that kind of within a normal range of length?
That's very.
That looks very
Yes.
long compared to the graphic you're showing there, where it's very close to the pumps. This looks to be a little bit more maybe
I think
longer
that, I think
distances
that
on
it's a
this.
perspective, because those tanks, if you look and see this side of this dispenser, what they did was they cut away a fueling mat.
Oh, yeah.
They cut away this area here. And so you would never put that over top of the tanks. The tanks
Right.
are always off remote. I think for Cumberland Farms, we designed them a lot further than this.
Okay,
And they have to have an eighth of an inch per foot pitch on them from the dispenser back to the tanks.
okay.
And so if you don't want to put your tanks, 10 feet in the ground, you don't put them very far. And the fact that if they had to be far, that still would be fine, but what they would do is they'd put an intermediate sump so that the piping can pitch, that they can cut back on that tank depth. And by looking at this plan, there's not going to be an intermediary sump on
Okay.
this. There's nothing,
So does every pump get its own home run, or are they daisy chained in series?
no, there's one pump and it fuels a main header that goes down through the center of these islands. And then it branches off to each of the dispensers. So you can scroll it. And this is just a real-time view. This is the first drawing I showed you where there were 6 30,000-gallon tanks. This is it. And like I said, you won't see too many places like this. But these tanks are in operation and working fine, pumping 1,000 gallons a minute. This just gives you an idea. It's as simple as that. It's a pipe within a pipe. And that outer pipe is just as substantial as the inner pipe. And so it's designed because if the inner pipe's under pressure, the outer pipe might see that same pressure if there's a leak. So everything is substantial, and that just gives you a view of it.
Is it fair to assume that all of these components are certified by like a nationally recognized test laboratory?
UL listed, yeah.
UL.
The pipe, ironically, the pipe that you're looking at is not UL listed, but that's simply because it's of the diameter. No gas station piping is that diameter. That's a 6-inch diameter pipe, and for whatever reason, nobody got it UL listed. But anything at a gas station is UL listed, just fair disclosure. But what you're looking at in this drawing is you can see that they penetrate the sump, and you see the black ring around where it's entering in, yeah, right there. That is a specially fabricated boot, and it basically it makes sure that that sump is sealed liquid tight, and so that if you did have a spill in there, it can't leave through there. That sump will get hydrostatically tested above those penetrations to make sure the penetrations are tight. And contractors do a pretty good job because they don't want to jackhammer concrete up if it fails, once this thing is covered. So they make sure it's good and make sure it's tested before the concrete goes on. But it gets tested.
Do this once.
It gets tested. Right now, it's tested once every 5 years, but they are evaluating that going more frequently.
When they do that yearly test, they don't drain the tanks, do they? They just air pressure
Which yearly test are you?
for the hydrostatic testing?
No, the hydrostatic test is not done yearly. It's done, it's going to be done, I think it's either 3 years or 5 years, and it might depend upon whether it has a leak detection probe, a leak sensor in it. But they're just talking about it, so it is coming, but what form it's gonna have, we don't really know yet.
But right now, the standard is 5.
It's, every 5 years, yeah. What you see is this is just a better look at what's going on inside there, just, to depict what we're looking at. That's a very good, that's a sump, that's a fiberglass sump. Pump is inside there, and you can see that's all double walled. That pump has a leak detector on it, so that if there were a leak in the piping, that the next time that someone goes to dispense gasoline, it won't allow them to. Because the pump, the way that leak detector works is that under 40 PSI, which is the deadhead pressure of the pump, it stays up, because it stays out of the way of the piping. If there's a leak in the piping, that thing slides down and it closes off the pump. And so the next time, somebody comes to get fuel. It doesn't happen typically in underground tanks. It happens in above ground, because above ground, the fuel changes, temperature changes from night to day, and it's enough to trick the leak detector, the mechanical line leak detector. Okay? This is the dispenser sump, and just to show you what's going on there. The newest designs, they have the electrical conduits going on the outside of the sumps, so that you don't have to deal with penetrating the sump just for an electrical conduit. And again, just shows more of the same. These pipes go up into the dispenser. They're right at the top of that. You can see a crash valve. You know what the crash valve? Yeah. Go to the other one because you can see the side of it. Yeah, that's a crash valve. It's designed so that if somebody knocks that dispenser over with their vehicle, it breaks and there's a poppet underneath that seals off and seals off the flow. Otherwise you might get a geyser if the pump was running. And so those have come a long way, and so that's it's called a crash valve. It also has a fusible link so that in the case of a fire, it will melt and also shut that poppet.
The two tanks, you have 3 grades. Is one of the tanks compartmentalized, or is it mixed? And if it's mixed, where's it mixed?
It's probably 4 for.
They're compartmentalized, but they, I believe that you got the premium and the regular, and then is there a mid-grade? And so it's just, it's blended at the pump.
It's blended at the pump?
At the dispenser.
Is that blended inside the dispenser?
Yeah, inside the dispenser.
Okay.
So there's no diesel?
There's diesel.
Yes, there is diesel.
Okay, so that's still.
It would be one of these compartments.
Okay, so.
Yeah, that's completely isolated from the gasoline.
Yeah, so that'd be bad.
Yeah. Fortunately, none of us have ever made that mistake.
I never knew the blended was.
This is a better look at the pump.
I never knew the mid-grade was just a blend.
Yeah, they move both ways.
It's a better look at the pump. There's a mechanical line leak detector on there, and that just gives you, just to see what that looks like. You can scroll. This is real-time looking inside of a sump that we did down for the town of Chatham, and that has 2 pumps in it. And so you can see there's all of the equipment that's in there. You can see the penetrations there with the boots, and the boots are open so that if we do have a leak in the pipe, we're going to find it. It's going to be sensed to the sump. And you can see that yellow line right there. That's actually a leak sensor, so that if there is any water or gasoline that does end up in that sump, it will give an alarm. And this is the, you know, all of these systems have some kind of a data management system so that you know how much is in there. It will give, this is where you, in the office, you'll get an alarm if you have any leaks. If there's any, it's called theft loss, but if there was a leak and you saw, if there was a sudden loss of fluid, this will give you an alarm. It distinguishes between your normal loss, which would be someone filling their vehicle. And in this case, so if you would get a theft loss would mean we just lost, 50 gallons or 100 gallons, more than we would typically lose in a given sale. You can see a cutaway here. That's that dispenser pan sensor. Just this is the dispenser sump. There's one in that as well. That goes back to that console that we were just looking at. And this is a cutaway of those where the tanks are filled. You can see that it's that it's got a 5-gallon spill capacity, and this is also gets hydrostatically tested. On that, right now it's on a 5-year schedule, but it will, like I said, I believe it might be going to every 3 years, unless it's double wall. That it's all in development, so I really can't speak to how it's going to finally look, but they do let us come to the meetings where they're talking about this stuff, and we get to put our input, but they never listen. So.
And just to clarify my own point of view, my own thought process here, those regulations are the DEP requirements, so if they change, nobody's grandfathered in.
That's correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, that's correct. You want that for operational and testing. There's no grandfathering. Obviously, they're not going to make you pull your tanks out of the ground if they decide that they got to be triple wall, which California is triple wall.
So does the DEP set their own standards, or they adopt like an NFPA?
They're required to meet the federal regulations, and they can make them more stringent, and they did in some instances. But they had to, at a minimum, meet the federal standards. It was just a little history is that these underground tanks were under the state fire marshal for a long, long time. And they just weren't, they're not cut out of the cloth the cloth that they're cut from, it wasn't good for this. And so now it's gone to the DEP where the regulations went from being, 10 pages to about 90 or 100. This is another view of this filling process, and you can see a cutaway of the spilled bucket, but you'll notice now you have this little flapper in there. And where we were looking at the console will give an alarm at 90%, and you don't typically utilize the 90% fill alarm, to top off the tanks. But if in the event that for some reason that did fail, you have a backup system, and it's this 95% flapper valve. And normally that flapper valve is laying in a vertical position, and filling the tank is through that drop tube. If the liquid rises to a point where that flapper then goes into the dotted line position, it shuts off the flow. It doesn't shock it, so there's no danger of a hose bursting or anything like that. It's because it's a slow kind of close, and then he can't put the product in it at the speed he was putting it in. He can empty his hose. It'll go in through. There's a little hole in that allows it to, so go into the tank. But we're talking about drips, and once you've had to wait to empty your hose through that hole, you're not going to top off a tank too many times after that. Now, I alluded to it that the DEP took this program over, and there's just a lot of backup and redundancy and testing and oversight now on these tanks that there never was before. For instance, every facility has to have both an A operator, a B operator, and a C operator. The A operator might be a regional person, but he is familiar with all of the regulations, He makes sure that they are implemented, that service station. The B operator might be the person at the station, or in Cumberland Farms, I believe, maybe he's over a couple of stations, but he's the person who has a day-to-day presence at the site. The A and the B operators have to be certified, have to take a test, have to have a certain level of education and background in order to become an AB operator. Then there's the C operator. You can't have the facility open if there's not a C operator on site. C operator is trained on what to do in the event of an alarm, what to do in the event of a spill, who to call, what actions need to be taken first. And I would say, I'll say this, I'm an AB operator for a number of stations, and I'm very familiar with the AB operator for Cumberland Farms. And I was on the phone with him the other day. We were talking about some other facilities and, you know, the typical troubles we have. And he said Cumberland Farms is easy. He has, how many, he must have like 50 or 60 Cumberland Farms stations. And he says it's the easiest customer he has, because everything is always in order, everything is done according to the book, and you know, with backup and with you know, redundancy. One of the things that they have that you know, is very good is that if they do have an alarm, obviously the person in the station is going to be the first one to detect it, but they have a third party that gets the alarm. And you'll learn this if you ever want to trigger any Cumberland Farms alarms. You have to call off-site to let them know you're doing it. And you know, so that there's always somebody watching this station, you know, and making sure everything happens correctly. There's one of the things that happens in this A and B operator is that they're looking at that spill bucket on a monthly basis, making sure that it's clean, that it doesn't have any gasoline or diesel fuel in it, that the covers are all color-coded. They're looking for any problems around the station. That's done monthly in accordance with EPA, I'm sorry, with the DEP's regulations. Then annually, they're taking all those sensors and they're testing them, putting them in a liquid to make sure that they will activate. They're testing the alarms. They pull that inventory probe out and they move the float up to create an alarm. They pull out that drop tube and look at the flapper valve. That's done annually. So this is not in the old days it was set it and forget it. It's not anymore. And so that's basically the underground tank. The DEP's oversight has just stepped it up a notch as far as containment and safety. I don't know, do I have another one? Okay. Now there were some articles that were passed around regarding leukemia, and you know, that's not my expertise as far as, you know, all of the leukemia, you know, but I will say that my comment about one of the articles, well, there was I thought there was two articles that were submitted. I went back and I got the original article, which was from the Journal of Contaminant Hydrology, and then there was another article about the proximity to gasoline stations. They gave some data in that article that was from France in 2003, United Kingdom in 1990. So the data in those articles is old. In 2000, the California Air Review Board began to evaluate gasoline equipment, and then began to develop kind of a UL. They developed their own standard, and they had to evaluate any equipment that went into a gasoline service station had to pass the California Air Review Board. And so after they got that rolling, then the rest of the states all said, we're going to do the same thing, and we're going to your equipment has to be approved by the California Air Review Board, or you're not putting it in our station. And that's the same with Massachusetts. So there's been a lot of improvements as far as I didn't talk about it, but the stage 1 and stage 2 vapor recovery that has come out in the past decade, where the vapors are transferred from vessel to vessel. never, there's vapor, there's a pressure vacuum vents on the vents for the gasoline tanks that prevent the vapors from spewing out those vents. Rather, they go back to the truck, that, the transport truck that's loading. As his liquid goes down, he's drawing those vapors back into his truck. He's going to go, when he goes to fill that thing up again, he's going to be filling, he's going to push those vapors into another vessel. So the vessels are, the vapors are always going to a tank, with the exception of what used to be called, or what is called, I guess, stage 2 vapor recovery. It used to be the same thing where it went from the tank to the vessel in your vehicle, right? It would transfer back and forth there. They found that there was a much better system, and that was to put an onboard vapor recovery system. So all of your vehicles, your newer vehicles, have this onboard vapor recovery system that's more efficient than the old stage 2. You probably all noticed, you remember that boot that you kind of had to push on recently? You don't see those anymore. Those boots were responsible for a lot of the drips and things that you saw at that which now you can be much more careful about that not happening. One of the articles did address that, but if the data referenced is from 1989 and 1992, and it does acknowledge the stage 2 equipment, this boot and this, that system. To that effect, I just would say that the EPA did an emission inventory conference in Baltimore, Maryland in August of 2017. And the one thing that was interesting that they presented in that was that in the United States, when we talk about VOC emissions, that's the volatile components in gasoline that we're concerned about, and there's a lot of focus and attention being made on that, obviously, because we don't want to pollute the earth. We don't want anybody getting sick. The graphs that they presented for the United States, the levels of VOCs and also benzene, this is the chart that I have, start to approach, we're not going to say zero, but we're at, let's say in 2000, the values were 400,000 to 500,000 metric tons of VOCs in the United States that were VOC emission inventory. In 2019, it's down under 100,000. So we've gone from between 400,000 and 500,000 to below 100,000. And by 2030, that line, you can see this, the line is approaching zero. Same with both benzene. You can see an interesting thing, and I didn't really get into it, but the benzene, you see a dramatic drop in 2012 for whatever reason, but it's going off to zero. But the date is 2030. That's just 10 years from now. You go to other countries, where you probably is more of a concern. China, 2050, it goes to zero. Okay. Brazil, 2050, goes to zero. And so you can see that we're making a lot of strides in the United States. If there's a concern about vapors and about these types of things, the EPA's on it, and they're making predictions about where we're going with it. There was an article also. It was a couple of articles about contamination on concrete, so I'll just address those. And the articles reference a study by Johns Hopkins, Journal of Contaminant Hydrology. That's the article where the amount of drips and drops that they talked about was from 1989, 1992. It's a very interesting mathematical problem, and they did some lab studies. For whatever reason, they used a hunk of concrete from a sidewalk from a construction project, and not sure why they do that, because the concrete that's over these tanks is going to be 8 inches thick, 4,000 psi. whereas you can study the effect of a gasoline drop getting on the concrete. They don't really offer any mechanism how it leaves the bottom of the concrete. And Cumberland Farms, they've replaced a lot of facilities, and they have analyzed the pea gravel that's underneath the concrete after they've taken it out, and they just don't find the gasoline there. I wouldn't say it's never zero, but it is essentially zero. It's a rare exception. And even when in those rare exceptions where they find it in the shallow layer underneath the concrete, and it didn't necessarily get there by migrating through the concrete. It might have gotten there through some cracks, and which is why they're replacing this part of the whole project. But they've never found it in the groundwater underneath that station. The article presents a model for how much of the gasoline evaporates and how much of it infiltrates into their test samples, but it doesn't really give a mechanism for how it can really escape that concrete, other than it says tracking it, meaning stepping in what you spilled and walking into a grassy area. It gives that as an option. I don't know how many times anybody here has stepped in a puddle of gasoline and then walked there. And then it also talked about wind-driven rain. And so they really just, I believe in the article, they just brushed over the practical ways that gasoline is going to escape the concrete. Basically it's a mathematical model. And with that, that's all I have for my
Could I
presentation.
just ask, getting back to the operational functions at the store level, do they still routinely stick tanks? Is that part of
The transport operator is not allowed to trust the station.
Right.
Because he's responsible for the overfill if it happens. And so, yes, they do still drop a stick down those tanks. The difference, that used to be a primary way that a tank failed, when it was met with a steel tank. Because they would just take it and let it drop, and it was a single-walled tank, and it would slowly put a dent in it. Now, there's wear plates that are fused into the fiberglass underneath all the openings. And so, it's a long time before that happens. But keep in mind that the problems with those tanks were that they were single-walled. So when you finally, after 30 or 40 years of letting that thing drop and bounce off the bottom, it eventually wore a little hole in it. In this case, we've got that wear plate that go through, and then we have two walls, and the middle wall has the brine. If there was a breach in that inner tank, the brine comes into the inner tank. Those inventory monitors have a water sensor in them. And so they're going to give you an alarm, because there's quite a bit of brine in there. I would say, I believe the average tank has about 3,000 pounds of the brine solution. It's a brine solution in there. So it's going to detect it. It doesn't happen with double-walled fiberglass tanks, though. They're just, if they're put in, installed properly, with good structural backfill, then they're not finding that they're corroding or failing due to lifespan.
But do the stores stick the tanks on routine basis?
I don't believe so, no.
No?
Idiot question, what does sticking a tank do?
Sorry?
What does sticking a tank do?
It's a way of physically measuring the inventory, and you add what you had to what is delivered, and they ought to jive. If they don't, it's a sign of a leak. There's a computer, at least in the old days, used to.
Yeah, it's basically saying, hey, we're not, the people who deliver the fuel, if they overfill a tank, and first of all, the driver gets in trouble. But if they overfill a tank and it's not going to happen because of these redundancies, but they just plan for these possibilities.
So it drops the stick in and goes, it's roughly half empty, so I'm going to dump in about this much.
And that's basically coordinated by the store. The transport operator who comes with his truck, he knows that pretty much going to take, they're multi-compartmented, so he knows what he's dropping. But he's told to verify it before he does the job.
So unlike the last presentation, now we can ask specific questions about this site, so. Anyone has any specific questions for them?
Well, thank you. Two things that I want to just cover. I understand there's a lot of annual inspections, monthly, annually. I'm assuming those inspections are for a reason. When you do those inspections, I'm assuming there are times when you find those things are faulty and aren't working?
Obviously, there are times where, it might happen that a sensor fails. However, these new systems are designed so that if one of those leak sensors fails, it behaves as an alarm. It doesn't just fail and it's quiet sitting there forever. It gives you an alarm so you think that there's a leak. So it's constantly testing that sensor. It's basically just, it's like the guy sticking the tank, even though this thing has an inventory monitor on it and has, it's basically just, we're not letting that happen again type of mentality.
How many tanks, do you review tanks for Cumberland Farms?
I'm sorry?
You're one of those A, B, C people for?
Yes, I am.
Cumberland Farms?
Not for Cumberland Farms.
Okay.
I was always saying the person that they have is, from Cumberland Farms, is very capable. And I just want to reiterate, we all have our customers that, Cumberland Farms is the biggest one he has and the easiest, because everything is like, is redundant and in order.
Redundant in a good way, right?
I'm sorry?
Redundant in a good way.
Yes.
Thank you, you've read some of the articles that were presented. One of those articles included a toxicology profile for benzene by the United States Department of Health and Human Services, the Public Health Service, the Agency for the Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. This is in August of 2007. And then basically just, it says benzene can pass into the air from water and soil surfaces. Once in the air, benzene reacts with other chemicals and breaks down within a few days. Benzene in the air can also be deposited on the ground by rain and snow. And then basically one of the findings that they had was, that I found startling, was benzene obviously is a component of gasoline. This is living near gasoline fueling stations may increase exposure to benzene. People are advised not to have their children play near fueling stations. Are you aware of anything issued by the United States Department of Health that comes away from that kind of finding that they made and that recommendation?
Well, when these gas stations, I would say that it's not children shouldn't play around gas stations. I think that's good advice. But and this, I'm getting a little bit away from where my area of expertise is, but in full-service stations, there's these weighted 8-hour averages and 24-hour averages that, these toxicology studies look at. So nobody should be around a gas station, but, people have to fuel their vehicles. But you'll notice that that's not the only source of benzene, in that it also is coming out of the exhaust of vehicles, and we're breathing that as we're driving down the highway, unfortunately, and also from cigarette smoke.
Sure.
And one of the articles says that the average person smokes 32 cigarettes a day, and I was thinking, man, what was that written? 30, because I don't know anybody who, even my heaviest smoker friends, don't smoke 32 cigarettes a day. But this is the way that, the way that these articles approach the problem. Benzene, is it good? No, it's not good. But it's, is wood good? Well, our houses are made of it, What are we gonna, I don't.
Is it just the component of gasoline? I mean, is it something, we talked about traps that catch things, that gasoline floats or not floats. Is benzene a portion of it that operates separately from the other components of gasoline?
Well, the principal hydrocarbons of gasoline will float on water. It does have various components that dissolve it will dissolve in the water, and that's the benzene, toluene, xylene, and ethylbenzene. In the environmental world, it's just called BTEX. And those are not, it's not soluble in water like salt is. The benzene prefers to be in the gasoline, but like any oil and water or any two-phase system, there's an equilibrium constant where some of the constituents in phase A will dissolve in phase B. There's Web Engineering has a second business besides installing underground storage tanks. We also are licensed site professionals and have been on the forefront of bacteria treating sites. And so bacteria naturally follows hydrocarbons and will thrive in the water in those areas where the gasoline is. And it feeds off of these dissolved contaminants. We were, when they had the spill in 2009 down in the Gulf, we were down there selling our bacteria, and they loved it, and they were going to buy it from us, but guess what happened? Before they decided to buy our bacteria, nature cleaned it up. There was no treatment was done down there. It was just naturally, bacteria follows petroleum. Not saying that means that we can be complacent about it, but nature seems to find a way.
All right, any further questions on the tanks?
I had
Or the
just
system?
two. First one was, if you go back to one of the original pictures, it looked like there was a membrane that was put down before the tanks went in.
Okay,
Could
yep.
you talk about that membrane a little bit, and does it come up around the tanks?
Yeah, no, that does not. If I were to tell you that was secondary containment, you would probably want to kick me out, because look at the wall over there.
Yeah.
The purpose of that membrane is, what you're looking at is, like I said, I called it well-washed pea stone. What we don't want to happen is we don't want the fines. You can see on the other side of that, where it's falling down, that's the natural dirt. We don't want that to migrate into our stone, because then we get settlement around the around the tank farm, and we don't want that over time. So before we install these tanks, we lay down a fabric that will prevent the fines from, there's 40% voids in that stone that it rain and whatever might wash and want to fill them. So we put that down.
Great. The other question I had was, is there a third party that evaluates your overall design for like different hazardous areas to make sure the equipment that you're putting in the different areas are suitably rated and certified? Is there like any overseeing body that does that?
You mean like at the state level?
Like a Division 1 or Division 2 area where there'll be a combustible environment, so it's explosion-proof equipment. You guys go through any third-party evaluations like that?
No, they're not in Massachusetts. I'm not quite sure if what you're referring to as far as Massachusetts, the way they wrote the regulations, is that they don't require a PE stamp plans. That's the one area where we didn't. I was a lone voice because I was the only PE in the room, but Cumberland Farms has their standardized designs, which were designed by professional engineers, and they have to be certified. They do, but they can be certified. There's a third-party inspector. I should have mentioned this during the DEP portion. So in addition to the AB operator, there has to be a third-party inspector who comes in every 3 years and inspects everything to make sure that they're following all the regulations. He's the one keeping the eye on the AB operator. The third party, the DEP regulations say that when you're done with a facility, installing a new tank installation, an as-built has to be prepared, and it has to be certified by either a professional engineer or the third-party inspector. And so where I said that they don't require it at the design level, they require it, but after the installation, during the installation, and to me that, I don't, that doesn't necessarily make sense to me, but because I still have to go there and certify it. So I tell people, if you want me to certify it, I'm gonna be there every day, at least watching all this stuff go in. But the third-party inspectors are trained and have a background in underground storage tank design and installation, and so the DEP has deemed them to be qualified to certify it that it was done according to the regulations.
Thank you.
A lot of this equipment, you're looking at, the stuff where I have these photographs where I'm doing 1,000 gallons a minute, it's not cookie cutter. But the gas station, all of the equipment is well-tested, well-tried, fiberglass. Cumberland Farms does all fiberglass piping, because of problems that happened in the late 1980s and early 90s. And so that's, they've come a long way in that regard, and so when you're buying the equipment, it's certified for that use. You're not drifting off out of the box. I work outside the box because of what I do, but Cumberland Farms stays inside the box.
Any further questions? All right, anyone in the audience like to ask any questions about these tanks? No? All right, thank you very much. Oh, yeah, come on up. That's okay.
If you can just see the mic there, so.
Thank you. Again, my name is Sue Lieber, 16 Seminary Way. All of this is well above my head. I would like to state I have concerns about the benzones. I have concerns about leaks. I know they don't happen, and that's what everybody's going to say, but there's got to be reasons these things are going into effect and leaks happen. I'm sure gasoline's been found in soil at some places. I'm concerned about my property values, children playing near it. The benzones, my house, again, is 150 feet from the property line, the corner of my house. My swing set is right on the other side of the fence. There's probably about 50 feet of trees. And my other concerns are the 24 hours. Those are my biggest concerns here. So I'd just like to state that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. All right, without any further questions from the board, I guess we're going to continue.
January 7th?
Yeah, the 7th is our next
Okay.
meeting.
What do we have?
Seventh?
Something else on the 7th?
Is it the 7th?
I think it's the 7th.
Marijuana bylaw.
We have that on the 7th, so it'll have to be the next one. Okay. Do you think we can do both? Yeah, okay. I
think so.
So I guess January 7th will be the next date if you want to go with that. Unless you'd like to volunteer to come the 28th.
I think the 7th
Instead
is
of the
fine.
7th, okay.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for your attention tonight. We'll get the rest of these things over to Paul tomorrow.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you all. Okay, and on to our first item, was the ZBL subcommittee.
Yeah, just, I think need a couple of minutes, but as you know, we're working on drafting those new village center core zoning, a new village center core zoning district. And we had talked about getting a subcommittee together, maybe up to 3 of you, to review the preliminary draft that would then get turned back to the full planning board January, February. The goal being that the planning board reviews the application, reviews the language, reviews the parcels that were selected, and then that becomes the warrant that gets submitted, which will be on February 12th. So you actually have a meeting January 28th and then February 11th. So I think this lines up really well. But this subcommittee works really well because then you'll have time before then to give us feedback, and then that feedback would be what gets initially submitted to the planning board. I should say that last week, the Zoning Board of Appeals did They appointed Alan Booley as a member, because we had talked about getting other boards involved. So it would be great to get 2 or 3 of you, and then I can give more instructions.
So we're looking for volunteers.
I'll volunteer.
Hold on. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Does the town or the selectmen have to sign off on the village plan itself before we take the step in terms of generating?
They endorsed it already.
They
Yeah.
being the selectmen, or is this?
The select board endorsed it about a week after you did. So both were in June of this year? They didn't have to, but they did.
No, but we still don't have, there were some options, and so are we planning around those, the various options in terms of there's certain areas that can be different things? And so,
So.
This is for the subcommittee to talk about.
Yeah, this would be the subcommittee to talk about, so,
Good questions.
Paul, just to clarify, this is for what would be a zoning district in that area, not necessarily choosing a configuration of the intersection.
this would not be, this would be separate from the
yeah,
intersection.
my concern was, given the configuration, there may be different types of needs and parking and other considerations as to what would go into them. If it stays as it is one thing. If it's, the post office is going to be a retail center, that may be something else in terms of we just have to consider. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I think,
Yeah, but this is,
was it Horsley Witten, I think?
they did.
Any change we make would take more than a decade to the intersection. So I
Yeah.
think, as is for now, and change it later, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, anyone else want to be involved?
Is it meetings or like via email?
That's what I was-
Put it
I
that
would,
way.
I was going to leave that to
Thank
you all.
you.
I think there, if you wanted to, we could have one meeting, but my hope is that we could just use a shared, like Google Drive, so that way there are about 4 or 5 zoning bylaw articles. There's really a couple that have the major changes to them, but I was hoping we could just do a shared program like Google Drive. But what I was planning on doing was emailing to see, do you all want to meet, second or third, second week of January, to see if you wanted to get your notes together and have questions like that. That's up to you. But I don't want to dictate to the subcommittee, but I think the best use of the time would certainly be reviewing the document and providing those comments. But we certainly could have a good
Starting with what their proposed, or they presented a draft.
Yeah, as one of the deliverables that Horsley Witten provided was a draft district. So then recently, I've worked with Chris Carmichael and Nicole. We've looked at it. We've made a few modifications to it, to what the Horsley Witten draft was. But I think we have it where we can get it to at this point. So then it would be an opportunity for you all to look at it early. So that way that you all can eventually get to propose, the warrant that goes forward. And then it would come back to you later with.
Yeah, and ideally, the subcommittee works well, because that's kind of our plan for going forward, is to break off some of these larger things into subcommittees, so we're not taking so much time at these meetings.
I would think at least maybe an initial meeting, just so we can get some focus around, what we want to focus on, and then after that.
Sure.
Yeah, then, changing language and going back and forth is something we don't have to get together every time. But
Yeah.
Julie, were you?
I have.
I'll join.
All right.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I don't think we can have more than 3 anyways.
Right.
So
You don't want to get to a quorum and then,
I was on the committee putting together the entire village
That's
center
right.
thing, so I'm fine letting other voices at the table.
you'll be seeing it soon.
Yeah.
enough.
Okay.
Did you check with Amy? Is she okay with us doing that?
I have as far as a subcommittee.
Yeah, as long as there's not a quorum of.
Okay.
of
As long as you're not a
board
quorum. I
members,
had a couple of questions for her, particularly, can we do a file sharing like this? My reading of open meetings law says we can, as long as you don't, or a member doesn't start saying, well, I'm not going to vote for this, just like you would anyway. So I think we should be fine. But just a couple of questions. If that's an issue, then we just send it out to you individually, and we just deal
Yeah,
with.
just so
Yeah.
before our meeting, just get a sense of what we shouldn't be doing, you know,
Right.
don't want to touch any.
So are we defining the village commercial district? Is that the end goal?
You have, well, right, you have the,
defined. We're defining the zoning bylaws that will affect that district.
right.
To
so
attempt
you
to
have the-
avoid the debacle of the last couple of town meetings, so.
So you
Get ahead
have,
of it.
there's really going to be two outcomes here. Actually, there'll be two warrants. One will be the new zoning district, and then its application on the ground. So right now, we have a preliminary, we have parcels preliminarily identified, but again, the subcommittee and ultimately the planning board might say shrink it, reduce it, shrink it, grow it. So.
Well, since there's a huge overlap between the village commercial district and the historical district, have you considered having a representative from the historical commission on this subcommittee as well? Because we're almost infringing upon their district as well.
That's a good idea.
I had not.
But we don't want to go to town meeting and not have them be a part of the process.
Right. Well, I guess what we could see if they're able to appoint someone to the subcommittee. If not, we could go to rather than being on the another option would be then just present that to them.
Yeah,
Because we
before
do need
take
to
it
go
up.
to some other boards as well.
Mhm.
We need to go to FinCom. We'll need
It would
to
be
go to
good
the
just to
select
extend
board.
an invite to them if they want to have one representative, on
Okay.
this subcommittee.
Any
It's one thing to have-
recommendations to?
I don't know any of them.
Yeah, I don't know who they are either, but we'll reach out.
It's one thing to present to them after
Yeah.
the fact versus having them part of the process. Yeah.
Right,
Again,
well, it would be.
It'll save a lot of time, yeah.
Yeah.
And feelings.
Yeah, and again, we were looking at March being active with other committees like Select Board, and I think we need to go to Water and Sewer Commission, especially with the sewer line going down there. It would sure be nice to get their input on
Yeah.
it.
But they're all approval, that's all part of the approval process and such. The Historic Commission has their own district.
Right.
Which for our particular project
The
is
portion of
within the village commercial
Yeah.
district. So I think they should be part of it as well.
Okay, we'll get a
But,
request
yeah,
out.
but I think you're right. I mean, the more people, the more consensus among the departments we can secure.
Right.
Then no one's surprised with it.
Yeah.
You go to the
Right.
police, you can go to the conservation, whoever, and just get,
Right.
saying, do you see an issue with this? Are you okay with that? And so
Sure.
they're not there saying, oops, no one asked me this.
Right, and again, there may be reasons we can't get them at this point for the subcommittee, but, we have, I've been working diligently on this schedule. We're gonna be busy January, February, March. If they're meeting, we can get on their agenda too and get them as early as possible, but, to get them involved, and if we need to go back, we need to go back.
So to summarize, Scott, Orin, and Julie will be appointed to the commission? Or committee?
Subcommittee.
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 Oh, man, we went from a commission to a subcommittee. Quick,
Ah.
guys.
Watch their work.
Volunteers now.
I slept like 4 hours.
Hasn't changed any, so.
And you guys will probably want to pick a spokesperson for the town meeting article as well. Somebody to present it to the town. That's the end
Yep.
game.
The
is
end
to-
game, yeah.
Yep. We will be passing out some information on Friday, including the draft and some other things, and one of the things will be the roles, and hopefully, we're planning on meeting with the property owners, butters, businesses, just get it out there and see what people think. Do that early, between January, February. And
Make sure you make an appointment at my office.
You're outside of it.
I know, I'm right outside.
You're outside of it.
All right. I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
But I don't want to leave.
Hey, you know what, let's stay, I'm just going back to work after this, so we can stay.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second, no discussion. All in favor? Aye. Thank you all.